Chapter 4, Indexing the Rear Derailleur.
Now in this chapter we're going to get deeply into what I know that you really want to hear, which is how do I index that rear derailleur. My suggestion is that you watch the whole chapter and then go back and work on your derailleur instead of trying to do it step by step as you watch the video, because some things that I explain will be more clear in retrospect after you watch the whole chapter.
We will discuss the definition of indexing and then go over a total of 12 steps. The first 6 steps deal with preliminary steps we take and adjustments, and then the next 6, 7 through 12, will be the details of indexing, and you will learn the proper vantage point to see what's going on with the derailleur throughout. You won't have to memorize all 12 steps, and every time you go to adjust your derailleur, you won't have to repeat all 12 steps either. If you find this discussion a little tedious, I apologize in advance, but I think it's the best way that I can give you a global understanding of the process. The bike I'm using throughout this video as a demo is equipped with a Shimano hollow link chain. The photo on the left is the correct way to install the chain. In the photo on the right, the chain is backwards. Because I removed and reinstalled the chain so many times, a couple times, I just got it on backwards. So don't be distracted by that when you see it. Indexing means adjusting the cable tension so that the rear derailleur shifts the chain back and forth with accuracy. First, we're going to shift the gears into the outer combination.
Having done this literally thousands of times, I found that I'd like to set the gears in what I'll call the outer gear combination, which means that I'm going to fully release the rear derailleur cable so that the chain is in the outer cog, and I'm going to shift the front derailleur so that my chain is in the big chain ring. So I have the outer combination to start with.
Now I'm going to make sure that the rear derailleur cable is not tight.
For starting out, I don't want this cable to be taut or have any noticeable tension on it. If it is taut, then I'm going to loosen it slightly, either at this binder bolt or by turning in this barrel adjuster.
Next, I'm going to make sure that the rear derailleur high limit screw puts the guide pulley directly under the outermost cassette cog or very slightly to the right of it.
Here's my guide pulley down here, and we can see that the guide pulley is guiding the chain onto the first cog. However, I think that the high limit screw is allowing the chain to be moving in just a little bit too far because it's dangerously close to the second cog. So what I'm going to do is move my guide pulley out a little bit by changing the adjustment of the high limit screw. With a little practice, you get pretty good at doing this, but I'm just eyeballing this here. As I said, I think it's a little bit too close, so I'm going to back out that high limit screw, and as I do, you see the guide pulley and the chain moving away from that second cog, giving it a little bit more room. And I think that's going to be a better starting out position, because I don't want the chain to be in the fully released mode so close to the second cog that it's already trying to jump up onto it. Now I can check just to make sure everything is quiet here in this outer combination. There's no rubbing of the chain on the outer cog, and looks like I've got my guide pulley where I want it to be.
Now if you try this and you find that the guide pulley and the chain do not move out when you loosen the high limit screw, it probably means that you have tension on the cable, which you should not have at this point. Put a drop of oil on the rear derailleur barrel adjuster, then screw it in all the way and back it out about a quarter of a turn.
Now I'm going to put a drop of oil on the threads of my barrel adjuster here, and then screw the barrel adjuster in all the way. A little drop of oil on these threads is a very good thing once in a while to keep those threads lubricated so that your barrel adjuster is available to you when you need it and won't be stuck. So I'm going to turn it in all the way and then back it out about a quarter of a turn.
The reason I turned this barrel adjuster in all the way was so that it would be screwed all the way into the derailleur itself. And when I therefore need to add tension in a minute, I'll have plenty of capability to turn it back out without the barrel adjuster coming totally out of the derailleur. If necessary, remove any large amount of slack in the cable with the binder bolt.
I want to make sure I don't have too much slack in this rear derailleur cable here. Again, don't expect this to be taut. But if it feels like it's quite slack, too much slack, you can always open up this binder bolt here with a 5mm wrench and just give the cable a little tug and then retighten the binder bolt. The purpose of those preceding steps is to make sure that the outward travel of the rear derailleur is defined by the high limit screw only, and it's not restricted from moving up because of premature tension on the cable. So I want to make sure that I do not have tension on this cable here before I start the indexing process.
Next, while I'm pedaling the bike, I'm going to shift the right shifter one click and then increase cable tension with the barrel adjuster enough to make the chain shift into the second cog.
While pedaling, I'm going to go up to the front of the bike and on the handlebars, click the right shifter one click. Now the bike did not shift, but you can see that it moved part way. The guide pulley moved over a little bit, not far enough to make the shift. Let's go back to the first gear and try to go to the second one. It's not moving far enough. That's very common. Don't expect in the indexing process that when you try to shift the bike the first time that it will move into the second gear immediately. Usually it won't. So now what I'm going to do is, as I pedal the bike, I'm going to increase the tension on the cable by turning the barrel adjuster out, and I'm going to keep doing that until the bike shifts. There it is. Now the bike is shifted into the second cog by virtue of increasing the cable tension.
Now this is important. I'd like you to view the chain and the cassette from the back of the bike.
Now just because the chain made the shift into the second cog doesn't mean that we've necessarily adjusted the cable tension correctly. To check to see that we actually have, we're going to use a different vantage point. And what I want to do is view this from the back, from the vantage point of the derailleur, so I can really see what's going on.
So I want to observe where the chain is located on the second cog and center it between the first and third cogs using the barrel adjuster.
Here's what I'm looking at, and I really can only see it from this vantage point. My chain is on my second cog, but I want to make sure that the chain didn't just barely make it onto the second cog. I don't want it to be too close to the first cog, and I don't want it to be too close to the third cog either. If I have not adjusted the derailleur correctly, the chain will have just barely moved onto the second cog, but will be vulnerable at any point to trying to shift back into the first one. On the other hand, if I have slightly too much cable tension, I'm on the second cog, but my bike at any moment will try to shift onto the third cog. I want the barrel adjuster to be adjusted so that my chain is exactly between the third cog and the first cog. And of course you can't see that by just standing up at the front of the bike where the shifter is. You have to get behind it and make very tiny adjustments of the barrel adjuster as necessary. If you look right down on it or from the back where the camera is, you'll see that the chain is right exactly between the first gear and the third one, which is what I want. If you look from the back, you can see this very accurately.
Next, I'm going to shift back and forth between the outer cog and the next 3 or 4 cogs just to make sure that the bike is shifting properly. And I'm going to make small adjustments with a barrel adjuster as needed.
Here we go. 1 shift, 2, 3, and back. Chain in our front derailleur in the big chain ring, and our outer gears in the back, the high gears. Our bike seems to be shifting very nicely. The reason that we indexed the rear derailleur by first putting the chain in the big chain ring is to observe what's called the chain line of the bike. The bike is best ridden when the chain is more or less parallel to the bike. So if I'm going to be in the big chain ring in the front, which is the highest gear, that's the gear I want to be in to keep the chain more or less parallel when I'm adjusting the shifting of these outer cogs here of the rear derailleur. And that's why we set the gears in this outer combination before we started making adjustments to the rear derailleur.
Now, using the front derailleur, shift the chain into the inner chain ring.
In preparation for continuing the indexing of the rear derailleur, I'm going to shift into the small chain ring in the front.
By pulling on the rear derailleur cable, shift the chain carefully and slowly as far inward as it will go to ensure that the chain will not overshift the biggest cog. If the bike has electronic shifting or internally routed cables, push the derailleur with your fingers.
As opposed to using my shifter to shift up into the big cog, I'm going to pull on the cable, and I want to see how far the chain goes. And look at this. The chain is overshifting. The chain is going past the large cog, which means I have a problem with my low limit screw. So I'm going to go back and tighten my low limit screw.
You might be thinking, didn't we just check the low limit screw a couple of minutes ago? Well, we did, but we didn't have the chain on the bike, so it's possible that we don't have it set perfectly. And the damage that can be done when you overshift the large cog can be very severe, so it's very important to check it a second time. So I'm going to adjust the low limit screw as needed so that the guide pulley can place the chain on the biggest cog but no farther.
So I'm going to tighten my low limit screw a little bit at a time until I'm satisfied that by pulling on the cable, there's no way I can cause the chain to overshift. It's still ready to do it. Can tighten it a little bit more. When I have my low limit screw set correctly, then, not far enough yet. Tighten the low limit screw, still some more. Often bikes come incorrectly set from the factory. Now I've got it right. See, if I shift, no matter how hard I pull on the cable, the chain will not go past the big cog, which is exactly what I want. There we go. So the chain cannot possibly overshift the gears. Here's another scenario. I'm in the small chain ring in the front and successfully shifting into subsequently bigger cogs, easier gears, but my bike won't shift into that biggest cog. There's enough tension on the cable, but the problem is that my low limit screw is not allowing the derailleur cage and the guide pulley to move inward far enough to make that shift. It's not going to be an issue of cable tension if everything is working properly until you get to the very last gear. So if I go to my low limit screw and I loosen that about a quarter of a turn, or here a half a turn, that will allow the derailleur cage and the guide pulley to move inward far enough to put the chain on the big cog. There we go. So now we have all the gears the bike is capable of providing. We should be able to observe here that in keeping with the chain line, keeping the chain more or less parallel with the bike, that the chain is now shifting smoothly and safely between these larger gears.
Nearly all bikes have a second barrel adjuster for the rear derailleur. This one here is on the down tube. Sometimes they're on the shifter. But these barrel adjusters allow you to increase or decrease the tension on the rear derailleur cable somewhat while you're on the fly. Turning the barrel adjuster this way screws it out and increases cable tension. Turning this way screws it in and decreases cable tension.
Now with a 10-speed bike like this, there's not a lot of margin for error because chains are very narrow and there's not a lot of space between the cogs, so the chain can't be off very much for the bike to shift correctly. Even though you have indexed the shifter properly, you may find yourself having to tweak the barrel adjuster just a little bit one way or the other. But don't expect the bike to perform in a way that it's not designed to. For example, keep in mind what I mentioned about chain line before, particularly if this is a triple chain ring in the front. You can't expect that if you're in the big chain ring that your bike will shift perfectly over the full range of gears in the back. Conversely, if you're in the small chain ring, you can't expect the same thing either. So try to keep the gear that you're in the front consistent with the gear that you're in the back. Now I went through all these steps in detail so that no matter what the starting out condition of your bike is, you'll be able to get the derailleurs indexed correctly. The fact of the matter is, once you get, for example, the limit screws set properly, you don't have to go back and constantly revisit those because they're not going to move. So the majority of times that you have to do some adjustment of your bike is it's just going to be a little tweaking of the derailleur using a barrel adjuster.